Hi everyone. So I wanted to do a quick video today talking about one of my favourite subjects, which is motor learning. Now, there are lots of theories around motor learning, but this one by Fitz and Posner I think is my favourite. So this is the three stages of motor learning. And what they proposed was motor learning comes in three stages. So we first of all have the cognitive stage, then we have the associative stage, and then we have the autonomous stage. So we're just going to have a quick look at these three stages in isolation. So first of all, the cognitive stage. So this is the stage I kind of think as a coach, I kind of think of this as the teaching stage. So this is where you have an understanding. So let's say, for example, you want to teach somebody shoulder in. So as a coach, you have an understanding of how you'd ride a shoulder in, what you're looking for in the horse, and you then try and pass that knowledge on to your rider, usually through explanation. Um, so this concerns what we refer to as explicit or declarative knowledge. So declarative knowledge is having an understanding of what you need to do. So say for example, we were learning shouldering, you could go and read a book, and you could read a book about shouldering and about the correct positioning, and you could read about the correct aiding system, and you'd have a good theoretical knowledge of how to ride a shoulder in. You could even go and tell somebody else how to ride a shoulder in. Now, having that declarative knowledge is not motor learning. It's the start of a process. I remember many years ago, back when I was a working pupil, my instructor, which is what we called them at the time, um, said to me, "If you know what you need to do, you're 50% of the way there." And I remember thinking, well, God, 50%. You think if you know what you need to do, you're like 100% of the way there. But actually, as I reflect back now from what I know now, I would say probably it's closer to 5 to 10%. So if you have a understanding of what you need to do, you're probably about 5 to 10% of the way there, in my opinion. Um, so this is about gaining an understanding. This is about the how the understanding how to do something. So it's characterized by large gains in performance because you're doing something for the first time, um, but it's inconsistent. It's not established. So as I said, when we think about the cognitive stage, we think about verbal explanation, but obviously there are other ways that we can assist in this learning through things like demonstration. So that could be watching a video, or the coach getting on and demonstrating how this is to be done, and gaining feedback as we're practicing our skill. So the second stage is the associative stage. Now it's called the associative stage because basically when you're establishing a motor skill, our brain goes through a little bit of a process. So if we go back to our example of shoulder in, so you've had and then maybe you've had a demonstration, you had an explanation of what you're trying to achieve. So you have in your mind a goal of what you want to be doing. So then what will happen is the brain will select a motor program that it feels is the best way of achieving the goal that you've set it. Then it will have a kind of evaluation of, was that motor program effective? Did that motor program effectively achieve that goal? If it did, then it gets wrapped in something called myelin. It gets myelinated, which means it becomes more established, more automated. If it doesn't, it becomes refined. So the associative stage is about the brain making associations between particular motor programs and particular outcomes, so it can then automate these programs and make them more established. So it's characterized by smaller gains in performance, adjustments and conscious control. So this is because you're constantly, be it through your coach or through yourself, constantly getting little bits of feedback. So again, if I'm teaching someone shoulder in and I've given them an explanation of this is how you do a shoulder in, they then go off and do their shoulder in, and I might say things to them like, notice where's your outside elbow in relation to your inside elbow. Is your breastbone lining up with the horse's withers? Where are you looking? So that they're having this process of just checking in and feedback and making associations between what works and what doesn't. Um, so this is the process of turning, and I think this is what is really important. And this is, as both a coach and a sports psych, I think this is the really interesting point: is how do we take declarative knowledge and turn it into procedural knowledge? So how do we get someone from that point where they have an understanding of what they need to do and actually physically being established in what they do? Um, so the associative stage is that process of turning declarative knowledge into procedural knowledge. And I think this is a really important point. And this is one of the reasons I tell writers about this a lot, is because it's by far the longest stage. So this is a stage where you're going to spend the most time. It takes a huge amount of repetitions for a skill to become established. Now, hopefully, through that, you arrive at what's referred to the autonomous stage. So, this is where motor performance becomes largely automated. Um, so, I wrote a blog a few weeks back, I think it was, around what's referred to as expert induced amnesia. So, if you have a rider that is learnt very young or has a certain degree of natural talent, they might not be aware of what they're doing because it's something they learned such a long time ago. It's become so automated. They don't really think about what they're doing anymore. And this is what enables them to be able to do a pre St. George and be able to ride changes and not really have to consciously control every movement. And it's in competition. This is what we're aiming for, because autonomous stage is characterized by fluent performance. So this is where we perform, because when you're thinking about what you're doing, when you're trying to consciously control what you're doing, while that's important, if you need to change something, and this is an important point about the autonomous stage, is sometimes people can automate something, a skill, but it's slightly flawed. So they have to bring it back into conscious control. They have to be willing to step back into that associative period to make those changes, and sometimes people aren't willing to do that because it's hard. The autonomous stage is it feels great, it's fluent, it's easy, it's not cognitively heavy. So people sometimes are reluctant to step back into that associative stage. However, if a skill that's automated is flawed, the rider will then have to step back and bring it back into conscious control to reprogram it. However, when you're competing, you want to be riding on the autonomous stage. So, conscious control, changing skill, refining skill, that's for lessons. When you're competing, you want to be riding autonomously. And that's something I think riders don't always understand, is that actually the brain that you have competing should be very different for the brain that you bring to your lessons. And this is because when you're autonomous, when you're riding on autopilot, you're much more likely to ride fluently. Um, and as stated earlier, automated movement may not be correct. So you have to say this is not always a linear process. If you want to fine tune your movement, you will have to be prepared to move in and out of these three stages. So I hope that makes sense, and you found that useful. And I will speak to you all again soon.